My landlord's rules were so wild they broke me. It was 3 a.m., and I was sitting on my floor crying. Not that gut-wrenching sob you have after a breakup, or the sting of bad news. This was different. This was the slow, grinding erosion of my sanity. A death by 1,000 paper cuts delivered as lease addendums. I was surrounded by the four walls of my dream apartment, a place that had somehow become a prison with granite countertops. And I was crying, silently, so I wouldn't get a noise complaint. Because my landlord's rules had finally, completely broken me. If you've ever felt like your home wasn't truly your own, then you need to hear this. Let me take you back to the beginning, back when this beautiful apartment was a promise, not a cage. It all started like these stories usually do, with a desperate search and what felt like a miracle. I'd been scrolling through listings for weeks, wading through dimly lit shoeboxes with mystery stains on the carpet. Everything in my price range was either a 90-minute commute or looked like a set from a true crime show. I was losing hope, pretty much resigned to another year in my cramped, noisy walk-up. And then I found it. The listing read like a fantasy, urban oasis with a community heart. The pictures were stunning. Floor-to-ceiling windows, a sleek kitchen, and a balcony overlooking a quiet, tree-lined street. It had a gym, a rooftop terrace, and was somehow miraculously in my budget. It felt way too good to be true. I booked a viewing for the next day, my heart pounding. When I got there, the building was even better in person. The lobby smelled like a spa. The landlord, a guy I'll call David, met me at the door. He was in his late 40s, dressed in trendy but slightly too tight clothes. He had this intense, unnerving eye contact, but his enthusiasm was infectious. He told me he wasn't a landlord, he was a curator of community. He didn't rent apartments, he onboarded new community members. It was all very new age corporate jargon, but I was so blinded by the apartment I just nodded along, thinking it was a quirky marketing thing. He showed me the unit, and I was sold. The sunlight poured in, and I could already see myself having coffee on the balcony, finally feeling like a real adult. David went on and on about the building's ethos. He'd handpicked every tenant, he said, to create a synergistic living experience. I remember kind of laughing to myself, thinking it was all a bit much, but harmless. He said the other tenants were all creatives, entrepreneurs, and forward thinkers. It sounded like a brochure for a cult, but again, that apartment was perfect. He told me he had 5 other applicants, but he had a good feeling about my energy. That should have been a billboard-sized red flag, but all I felt was flattered. Chosen. I went home and barely slept. The next day, he called and offered me the place. I practically screamed. I signed the lease digitally within the hour, barely skimming it. I paid the deposit and first month's rent, my hands shaking with excitement. I was so focused on the dream, I didn't see the fine print that wasn't even on the lease yet. I thought I'd found a home, but I'd actually just signed up to be a test subject in a bizarre social experiment. The ink wasn't even dry when the first email arrived, and the dream started to sour. The email landed 2 days after I'd signed the lease and sent him a small fortune. The subject, exciting onboarding community living guide. I opened it, expecting trash schedules and utility info. Instead, I got a 10-page PDF called the Harmony Living Addendum. My stomach did a little flip. An addendum? After I signed? I started to read. The first few pages were more of David's jargon about synergy and intentional neighboring. Then I got to the rules. My eyes scanned the page, and I had to read the sentence twice. Rule number 1, mandatory monthly community gatherings. All tenants were required to attend a monthly social event. These gatherings, it said, are essential for fostering the building's unique ecosystem. Failure to attend would result in a $50 community contribution fee. A fine. I just stared at the screen. Mandatory parties? With a fine if I don't go? I'm an introvert. The last thing I want is forced small talk with my neighbors after a long week. My home is my escape from people. This felt wrong, deeply invasive. And as I'd later learn, rules like this are often legally unenforceable. I thought about emailing him, about questioning it. But I was stuck. My old lease was up, movers were booked. I was locked in. So, I did what so many of us do, I rationalized. How bad can it be? I told myself. Maybe it's a good way to meet people. My first mandatory social was a wine and vision board Wednesday. I walked in to find David directing people like a camp counselor, smooth jazz blasting. We all had name tags and the same pained, forced smile. For 2 hours, I sat there with safety scissors, cutting out pictures of beaches from old magazines while David circulated, asking us to share our manifestations. It was excruciating. It was a mandatory work team builder that I could never leave, because it was happening in my home. I spent the evening hiding in a corner with a plastic cup of cheap Merlot, counting the minutes until I could escape without getting fined. When I finally locked my apartment door behind me, the silence felt like heaven. This wasn't just quirky. It was controlling. And it was just the beginning. A few weeks after the vision board incident, a new email landed, Guest Policy Building Harmony Update. My blood ran cold. The addendum was being updated. Rule number 2 was the guest vetting process. Any overnight guest had to be pre-approved by David 48 hours in advance. And it wasn't a notification, it was an application. I had to submit my guest's full name and why they were staying, so David could review the request to ensure the visitor's energy aligns with the community's. He could deny anyone, no explanation needed. I was floored. This wasn't just an overreach, it was a flagrant violation of a basic tenant's right to have guests. This wasn't about safety, it was about him having the final say on who could even set foot in my home. The first test came a month later. A close friend called me in tears late one night. Her relationship had just ended. She asked if she could crash on my couch. Of course, I said yes. Then panic hit me. The 48-hour rule. I had a choice. Tell my crying friend she couldn't come, or break the rule. I chose my friend. I spent the whole night on edge, listening for every footstep, terrified David would somehow know. Then came rule number 3, bi-weekly wellness inspections. In another cheery email, David announced he'd be conducting brief wellness inspections every other Friday to check for energy blockages and environmental stressors. This was, of course, a flimsy excuse for what were basically illegal searches. A landlord needs a valid reason to enter, like repairs, not to check your chi. The first inspection was a nightmare. He breezed past me with a clipboard and started commenting on my stuff. He said the books on my nightstand were cluttered energy. He suggested a different colored bath mat. He even opened my fridge and tooted. I just stood there, frozen with shame and anger. This was my home, my private space, and this man was judging it with a pseudo-spiritual rubric. The feeling of violation was profound. My home, the one place I was supposed to feel safe, had become a stage. The stress became a constant hum in the back of my mind. If you think a landlord opening your fridge to critique your groceries is crossing a major line, do me a favor and hit that like button. Because as unbelievable as this sounds, this was just the warm-up act. Trust me, it gets so much worse. The inspections and guest policy were about to be weaponized. The next email introduced rule number 4, the Aesthetic Harmony Financial Accountability Framework. It was a list of new, absurdly specific rules, each with a fine. More than one pair of shoes in the entryway. A $25 fine for cluttering the arrival portal. String lights on the balcony that weren't warm white. A $30 fine for aesthetic dissonance. Leaving laundry in the machine for more than 10 minutes. A $15 inconvenience fee. These weren't about maintenance, this was about absolute, microscopic control. The fines started appearing on my monthly rent statements as community balance invoices. But the money wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the public shaming. David installed a large corkboard in the lobby he called the Community Accountability Board. On it, he'd post notices of rule violations by apartment number. A reminder to 4B that the flamingo is not in alignment with our building's aesthetic. To 3A, please remember our guest policy. Unregistered energy signatures were detected on Tuesday night. It was a high school burn book, Landlord edition, and it was a clear form of illegal tenant harassment. It turned us against each other, creating an atmosphere of suspicion and resentment. The anxiety was suffocating. My heart would race every time I saw an email from him. My home had become the primary source of my stress. This wasn't a landlord-tenant relationship, it felt like psychological warfare. And I was losing. The breaking point came in late October. My parents, who live a few hours away, decided to surprise me with a weekend visit. They called me on a Friday afternoon, an hour away, excited to finally see my new place. My blood turned to ice. Rule number 2. The 48-hour approval. My own parents. For a split second, I actually thought about telling them they couldn't come, trying to explain that my landlord had to energetically approve them. The insanity of it hit me like a ton of bricks. But the fear of David was stronger. So I decided to hide them. I told them to park a few blocks away, and I snuck them in through the back service entrance like fugitives. I gave them a frantic, whispered tour. "He lives on the second floor," I whispered. "He can hear everything." My parents were just confused and worried. This happy apartment I'd bragged about now felt like a trap, and I was ashamed. We survived Friday. But Saturday morning was my wellness inspection. I'd completely forgotten. At 10 a.m. sharp, his signature 3 quick, aggressive raps hit the door. My parents were in the kitchen. There was nowhere to hide. I opened the door a crack, trembling. "David, now isn't a good time." He just smiled. "The inspection is mandatory." He pushed the door open and saw them. His face went from smug superiority to cold fury. He spoke in a low, menacing tone. "Unregistered guests. A clear violation." My dad, a no-nonsense guy, stepped forward. "I'm her father. We came to visit our daughter." David ignored him, his eyes locked on me. He pulled out his phone to take pictures as evidence. "This is a serious breach of community trust," he said. "This is grounds for an eviction notice." It was an empty threat. In California, a landlord needs just cause to evict you, and a surprise visit from your parents isn't it. But in that moment, in front of my parents, the humiliation was absolute. All the stress, the anxiety, the sleepless nights, it all just crushed me. After David left, my mom looked at me, her eyes full of worry. "Honey," she said softly, "this isn't living. This is a prison." And that's when I broke. I just started sobbing. My parents left an hour later, begging me to come with them. That night, I sat on my living room floor in the dark, in the beautiful apartment that had cost me my peace of mind. And that's where the story began. Crying on the floor, utterly broken by my landlord's rules. Sitting there on the floor, something shifted. The despair curdled into cold, clarifying rage. My mom's words echoed in my head, "This isn't living." She was right. I'd been so focused on not breaking the rules that I'd forgotten I had rights. The constant anxiety wasn't just an unfortunate side effect, it was the result of sustained, illegal harassment. That night, I got to work. I created a document I called the Landlord from Hell file. I saved every single threatening email from David. I took pictures of the public shaming board. I wrote down a dated account of every wellness inspection, every passive-aggressive comment, every single thing that made me feel unsafe in my own home. Then I spent hours researching my local landlord-tenant laws. The words on the screen were a lifeline. I read about my legal right to quiet enjoyment, a tenant's right to live peacefully without repeated, unreasonable interference. David's constant inspections, guest restrictions, and public shaming were all textbook violations. A landlord can set rules, but they can't be used to harass you or control your personal life. The more I read, the more empowered I became. The fear that had been my constant companion started to recede, replaced by a steely resolve. I was done being a victim. The next morning, I called a local tenants' rights organization. The volunteer on the other end wasn't surprised. They were validating. They confirmed his behavior wasn't just weird, it was illegal. They told me how to formally break my lease based on constructive eviction. When a landlord's actions make a property uninhabitable, not physically, but by destroying your right to live there peacefully. I finally had a plan. Armed with my file of evidence and a scathing letter citing specific state laws, I requested a meeting with David. We met in the soulless common room where it all began. I put my file on the table between us. Before he could say a word about synergy, I started talking. I calmly laid out every rule violation, every instance of harassment, every illegal entry, and I referenced the specific laws he had broken. I showed him the photos of the accountability board. For the first time ever, the smugness vanished from his face. He saw the neatly organized evidence, and he saw I wasn't the timid tenant he'd been bullying for months. He saw someone who knew her rights. I told him I considered my lease broken due to his harassment and breach of the covenant of quiet enjoyment. I would be out in 30 days, and I expected my full security deposit back. I also told him that if he fought me or tried to ruin my rental history, I would file a lawsuit for harassment and emotional distress. I pointed out that his clear, documented pattern of illegal actions made for a very compelling case. He was silent. He tried to argue, falling back on his old jargon. I was just trying to build a positive community. A community doesn't fine its members for having their family visit, I said, my voice ice cold. It doesn't thrive on public shaming and fear. He knew he was beaten. He agreed to let me break the lease without penalty and return my deposit. Moving out of that apartment was one of the most liberating days of my life. I'm in a new apartment now. It's smaller and the view is a brick wall. And it's a palace. It's a sanctuary. My landlord is a normal guy who I just nod at once a month. My friend came over unexpectedly the other day, and the only thing I felt was joy. I leave my shoes by the door, and nobody finds me. It's amazing how simple things, privacy, autonomy, safety, can feel like the greatest luxuries when you've been denied them. That experience taught me a hard lesson. Your home should be the one place you feel completely safe. Read every single document. Know your local tenant laws, they are your shield. And most importantly, document everything. If something feels wrong, it probably is. A landlord is a service provider, not a cult leader. You are a tenant, not a disciple. That whole experience left scars, but it also made me so much stronger. It forced me to find a voice I didn't know I had. So now I have to ask you, what would you have done? What's the single wildest rule a landlord has ever tried to impose on you? I know my story is crazy, but I have a feeling I'm not alone. Let me know your stories in the comments. I'd genuinely love to read them and create a community of our own. One built on support, not surveillance. Thanks for listening.